Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 21st episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. Today's podcast is all about employee staff networks, but in particular disabled staff networks, and how they can have the power to really shape and amend the culture and behaviours of their organisations. Often January is a time where we might take a step back and think about new projects, as well as consolidating projects we haven't quite finished. And I'm focusing on disabled staff networks because I think they really have the talent, ideas, enthusiasm and knowledge to change behaviours of their organisation. Effective networks can really help to create change in organisations by using the talent, ideas and enthusiasm and knowledge of their staff, as well as to support leaders and managers in implementing change. Sometimes setting up a staff network can seem overwhelming. Maybe you've been part of one, maybe you've tried to set one up and it didn't work, it fizzled out. Where do you start? What might the barriers be? And how do you maintain momentum? And in order to answer these questions, I'm joined by a true expert in the field, Kate Nash, OBE. Kate Nash is the world's leading authority in networkology, the science behind the growth of workplace networks and resource groups, most known for her work with disability networks. She set up an independent hub of best practice in the establishment of disabled employee networks, publishing the first best practice guide in 2009 with a ministerial launch. In 2007, Kate was awarded an OBE for services to disabled people, and in 2013 she was appointed Ambassador to Disability Rights UK. In 2014, her book, Secrets in Big News, which she's going to go on and talk about, and it's all about tackling the issue of disclosure of disability and what employers can do to help people be themselves at work. 2,511 disabled employees from 55 employers took part in the research, which was sponsored by BT, Fujitsu, Metropolitan Police Service, the Post Office and PwC. Kate then went on to launch Purple Space in October 2015 as the world's first professional development hub for disabled employee networks, bringing together the 850,000 disabled employees from across employee networks. And I'm so delighted to welcome her to the show today.
Leda, thank you so much. Really delighted to be speaking with you today. It has been so long, but it's great to be in touch. I'm really happy to join you. So I have the very great pleasure of heading up Purple Space. Purple Space is a membership organisation that supports employee network leaders, disability employee network leaders and network leaders to secure best practice advice about how to set up and deliver really high-performing employee networks. We talk about building community and unity. So what we do is deliver best practice advice, lots of collateral, resources, but more importantly, we put network leaders in touch with one another so that they can share best practice and to deliver well. In terms of myself, I've been in the disability space for a very long time. Back in the day, I used to be a lobbyist and would eyeball our then parliamentary masters to, I suppose, push for the process of securing the Disability Discrimination Act prior to 95. And thereon in, I chose very deliberately to work with the employers community. One, because there was a lot that needed to be done, but also because I noticed, I suppose, that we, as disabled people, people with health conditions, people with mental ill health, we have skin in the game. And we are required, I think, sometimes to step up and to, put our own energy into ensuring that our workplaces are inclusive and diverse. And as we know, the human experience of disability is something that is hard for many of us to own. So my objective in setting up Purple Space when I wrote the book was really to build a life-affirming and positive community of change agents that supported their business to be disability confident, but also reflected on the things that we need to do as individuals to build our confidence and resilience. So that's what I do. That's what we do.
Oh, thanks so much, Kate. And how did you, some people might be thinking, why Purple Space? So how did you come up with the name and how did the Purple Space movement gain traction?
Yeah. So Purple Space, so we've been around for 4 years. We set up in October 2015 and it came out of a piece of work that I did, a book that I wrote, Secrets and Big News. I didn't write it alone. We had an editorial board of some amazing individuals from different types of organisations, like Andy Garrett, who was then at Met Police, now at GSK, John Turner from Lloyds Banking Group, Brendan Roach from Business Disability Forum, and other amazing people. And the purpose of the book was to put the spotlight on what we often called, on what we sometimes still do, regrettably. We talk about the disclosure rates of disabled people or people with ill health, or the declaration rates. And the question on my mind was, although on the one hand, from reputable sources like the DWP, Office of National Statistics, we know that most organisations will have in their workforce around 10% of their people. So in the public sector, it's around 12%, in the private sector, around 10%. And yet when organisations monitor their workforces, they invariably have data that suggests they only have 1% or 2% or 3%. So the question on my mind was, where are these missing people? What is it about the human experience of disability that makes it really difficult for us to bring our authentic selves to work, and to be prepared to be to share that information in formal ways through monitoring. So we wrote the book. It was a provocation. We interviewed 2,500 disabled people. We had 55 employers involved, large corporates as well as public sector organisations, NHS trusts, police forces, universities. And with that rich seam of information, we came up with 15 ideas for employers to try, and 15 ideas for disabled people to try. And the book was just really well received. And it was from the book that our client base, because I've been helping companies to set up employee networks for 10 years previously, the book just really provoked a question, which was, Kate, could you find an elegant and cost-effective way of bringing together network leaders so that they can share best practice, learn from each other, and really start to build, as I say, a life-affirming narrative? And so that's what we did. So from the get-go, I remember our first member, I think it was Fujitsu, swiftly followed by Barclays Bank, to now a really vibrant network. We have 600 members across 100 organisations, and we continue to grow and grow and grow. And of course, we now lead the Purple Light Up, which I might mention later. So, yeah, it was of course prompted by the book, but much more than that. For me, it was about making sure that we could build an elegant and low-cost vehicle of connecting employee networks and resource group leaders who have busy jobs. They have what I would call proper jobs. They will always have a connection, of course, with their HR teams and their D&I teams, and work in partnership with them. But they're quite a unique group of individual change agents who need to be refreshed and motivated and engaged and excited with each other. So that was my driver.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. And that's how we met, because I remember having one of the first copies of the Purple Space book, and joining and being really excited about it, because often you feel, even though, a lot of the organizations you work with are huge, so there could be change agents over different sites, but you still need that space virtually, intra and externally, to network and get the ideas, because often we all hit our heads against brick walls at times, don't we?
Absolutely, Layla. Yes, and I do remember your engagement, very early adopter of the ideas that were contained, within that report. So yeah, absolutely, yep.
And that term disability confidence, so we know that, those of us who work in the disability space, in the employment space as well, to disability confident obviously replaced 2 ticks. It was thought that 2 ticks was quote unquote an empty shell. And now disability confident has 3 levels. But actually, I'd really like to hear from you, your personal take on the term disability confident.
Yes, absolutely. So I've been around the block a long time, Layla. So for me, the language of disability confidence, I remember when it was first invented, it was a term that was originally conceived of by the then chief executive of Business Disability Forum, the founding chief executive, Susan Scott Parker. And the term goes back 20, 25 years perhaps. And for her and for then BDF, it was a way of describing 3 or 4 standards by which organisations could safely say that they felt that they were disability confident businesses. So they were things like not making assumptions about what disability means, in other words, not making assumptions about what people can or cannot do.
Yeah.
It was about ensuring that there are routinely processes in place whereby an organisation can deliver the workplace adjustments that individuals might need. It was about recognising that there are some themes and patterns, I suppose, and that it's necessary and proper to drill into the more logical ways of creating a barrier-free workplace. What I mean by that is, any organisation can assume, as I say, that 10% of its people will have a disability, and of the more of the some of the specific barriers that maybe people with visual impairments might have, people with mental ill health might have, people who may be deaf or hard of hearing. You can naturally make some assumptions about how to build a barrier-free environment in relation to particular impairments. And then the fourth way of saying you're a disability confident business would be to learn directly from your own people. So to be able to say hand on heart that in the development of policies and practices and procedures, that it was necessary, proper, and that you had good systems and processes to learn directly. So that was the original. Those are the 4 key principles, I think, that BDF used to talk about. And then the government, or our then government, some years ago, created the Disability Confidence Scheme. And we know that there has been some good attention to how that scheme can be developed and then promoted to ensure, one, that the language of disability confidence is usefully applied to lots and lots of different organisations. So, small businesses, large businesses, organisations that may not have been associated with BDF, and make it more accessible. I think that was the thing that I have enjoyed. I know, there are some critics out there about the scheme, but the one thing I notice, and the reason why I choose to join the Business Leaders Group as an advisor there, is because I think it's a scheme that, when usefully applied, it can make it easier, particularly for SMEs, to get engaged. And of course, as you say, they've got different levels of engagement, and they're scrutinising and are forever looking at ways in which to improve that scheme. Lots of toolkits to support businesses to develop process. So what does disability confidence mean for me? I think, and in relation to Purple Space, so, yes, there are some definitions about what the scheme means, and the heritage of that language, as I say, goes back 20, 25 years. But for Purple Space, we talk about building disability confidence from the inside out. And the reason we use that language and that strapline is for 2 reasons. One, because while organisations will continue to look out for and bring into their organisations external sources of advice and support, they will continue, quite rightly, to use the enabling products, I suppose, that the government scheme have introduced, and other organisations, professional organisations, and other great suppliers. They will always need those enabling products. For me, you don't really develop systemic and systematic change if, one, you don't embed within your organisation what I would call a vehicle for driving change. And, we're all in the business of helping companies to set up employee networks, and then to develop through those networks a real a strategy for developing cultural change. So disability confidence from the inside out for us is about ensuring that you invest in your internal vehicle for change, so you don't become overly reliant on external products and influencers, even though most organisations will continue to need them. And then at an individual level, it's about recognising sometimes inadvertently we sometimes have internal barriers that we need to get over. And what I mean by that, we talk about the soft bigotry often of low expectation. As we know, disability and mental ill health are human experiences that the vast majority of individuals, even those the most politicised, their experiences that if pushed, we would probably hand on heart say that we would prefer not to have. And the reason why we often think that, I mean, of course, not everybody, but a good slug of individuals would say that if pushed. And it's because it does, I suppose, create a degree of complexity in our lives. We don't always know that we're going to be productive and can work. It often means that many of us have to think about things that we're going to do differently to protect our mental ill health and our physicality. Others will make assumptions about what we can and cannot do. And all of that is wrapped up in what we call the soft bigotry of low expectation. So networks and the language of disability confidence for Purple Space is as much about how do we get a better understanding on what we need to do to build inner confidence, to ask for the adjustments that we might need, to bring our authentic selves to work, to talk to and learn from others with disability and mental ill health. And then what I would call lean into our careers, lean into our organisations that want to change, to park sometimes the very difficult experiences that we have had, and to maybe use those experiences to support the organisation to do differently and better. So that was a long answer, Layla, forgive me.
No,
But it's at that individual level. That's what it's all about for us.
Yeah, and I think that is fascinating, because I'm not sure that will be kind of the context of disability confident would have been known by everyone. And also I really love Purple Space's strapline about inside out, because often it's not like that at all, is it? It's like, oh, quick look around, they're doing this, quick get that initiative in, stick that plaster. And I'm not criticizing, but you've got to build that solid foundation inside, haven't you? Which is absolutely what you do.
Absolutely.
And
in a nutshell, yes.
And so when you've got if you've got an organisation that isn't sure about how to start setting up a disabled staff network, what would be your tips then on how to how could workplaces start the conversation about developing a disabled staff network?
Yeah, but it's different things, and different organisations will start networks from different places. And I think the trick is about to keep it simple. Sometimes we can overcomplicate things. And the reality is networks and resource groups are all driven and led by individuals who are, in effect, doing this voluntarily. So they tend to be what we say individuals with proper jobs. So they are working in the business or the organisation, and they've got their own deliverables that they need to deliver in terms of their day job. So when you're looking to set up a network, we would advise, one, to keep it as simple as possible. There's a wonderful saying that if you want anything done in life, ask the busiest person.
Yeah. That's why we have so much on our plates, Kate.
Exactly. You will know all about that, Layla. So yeah, we would suggest, start it in a place where you might have 2 or 3 or 4 volunteers who choose from, say, a year or 18 months to pool their knowledge and pool some of their spare time in order to get something going. So to really keep it simple. And what I mean by that is not to overcomplicate it with a big governing instrument. Don't overly worry about what success looks like in terms of numbers within that network. Don't make assumptions, I suppose, about tasks and activities that network might choose to be involved with. we see through our many networks and many members that they all have the majority will have good relationships with their D&I managers and their HR teams. And ultimately, it's those teams that are mandated with the responsibility for mainstreaming disability within the business. And I think once network leaders have got their head around that, it actually liberates them to think about where the added value is. So that's our first advice: keep it simple. And then once you've got a few volunteers, decide what may be the 3 things that would be helpful to the organisation. So, for example, would be so a lot of organisations would start with storytelling campaigns. We talk, and I've already mentioned, we talk about how can individuals bring their authentic self to work. And this is all, but one of the most powerful things that networks do is they're in the game of normalising disability and mental ill health in the context of work. So finding a very small handful, 4, 5, 6 people prepared to share their story of disability. That may be through a podcast, it may be through a poster campaign, it may be through a blog campaign or a video campaign. Different organisations will use different methodologies. But if a network chooses just simply to identify some people who want to share their story, decide what a good story looks like and feels like, so starts to understand and give some parameters around that story. There's no point in just sharing your story for storytelling's sake. That changes nothing. But think about what are the messages you want to offer. How would you do things differently or better as an individual? What are the great things that you have seen around you in terms of what people have done to support you to get the adjustments that you might need? So storytelling campaign. So that's the second piece of advice. Keep it simple. Work to a standard of least resistance by just maybe 2, 3, 4 volunteers. Start a storytelling campaign, and then start to think about what your strategy might look like, and making sure that it's absolutely aligned to what the D&I agenda is. See your D&I team as partners. Be brave to think of them as customers too. D&I teams tend to have a lot on their plate, and often will have to, by the nature of their brief, they spread themselves often too thinly. So positioning your D&I team almost as a customer can obviously liberate you to think about the 2 or 3 things that you can add value to. So that's what would be our advice.
Oh, thank you, Kate. And I think, I can absolutely. I know from being a previous head of D&I that you are spread thinly, and often the network momentum can come from someone in D&I. But I really like the way you. Yes, I totally agree that you think of them as customers, because actually the staff network should have a kind of momentum of its own. It shouldn't be driven by the D&I team.
Absolutely. It's about partnership. It's about partnership. It's recognising that there are more than one way to skin a cat. Some of the most successful networks, if I look across our membership, as I say, 600 members across 100 organisations, mixture of public, private, some very large global multinationals. I think the one thing that we would say that successful networks have in common is the partnership that they will have with their D&I team. And their D&I professional is willing to be brave and take a risk and to liberate that network to go into territory that perhaps hasn't quite been done before, whether it is a storytelling campaign, whether it's a drains up on the workplace adjustment process, whether it's about looking at career development initiatives. It's about aligning the agenda and opening up the what is possible.
I think you've put it so beautifully. I don't think I need to say anything else. So thinking about that, let's say they follow your tips, but inevitably, and depending on, it could be size of the organization, it could be the kind of work that's happening, it could be deadlines. What might be some of the barriers some staff and managers may encounter when setting up and maintaining a disabled staff network?
Yeah, I think the first is time. It's simply time. As I say, the beauty of networks is because they're led by volunteers, and they become a vehicle to normalise disability and mental ill health as just a normal part of the human condition, as is, having children, or us having to deal with grief and death in our lives, or divorce, or house moves, or changing political landscapes. We as human beings have to navigate a whole raft of experiences, and disability and mental ill health is just one of those. So the vehicle of networks is all about normalising that. The challenge is often about time, because it's, network leaders, by their very nature of they've put their hat in the ring, is that they often have a personal story. They often have skin in the game. Not all. We have some fantastic allies and champions who head up networks, individuals who would say that they don't have personal experience of disability or mental ill health, but nonetheless have the passion and the commitment and a strong sense of justice and want to get things done. But, so time is the biggest barrier. And to mitigate against burnout, that's why we really, really encourage network leaders and their committees to think deeply and carefully about how they put together a strategy. There's absolutely no point in having a strategy with 20, 25 things you want to get done, constantly juggling time, may have very little resource, whether that's cash or indeed drawdown, or whether it's just people resource, wherever that resource comes from, ultimately it will be in short supply. So it's really important to come up with a short list of things that are achievable, so you can feel good at the end of that year, rather than a list of 20, 25 things which are deeply unrealistic. It does no good to anybody, not least those people who are leading the network. So that's the biggest barrier, time. I think, if you'd have asked me this a few years ago, the other barrier I would say is, this feeling that disability is last on the list. But you're asking now in January 2020, and I actually think that that's changing. And there are a number of drivers and things that are happening to actually change that. I think, or I like to think that Purple Space is a contributor to that. So employee networks, as I say, are entities, little ecosystems of individuals who have skin in the game and are starting to change the narrative. As you change the narrative and start to think about the positive narrative around disability, you actually make it easier, I think, for people to join that story. I mean, nobody just wants to be associated with doom and gloom. So as the narrative changes, as we talk about celebrating the economic contribution of disabled people, which is what Purple Light Up does, you start to make it easier for people to feel good and excited. So as I say, so the barrier that disability is last on the list. I think we still have a way to go. I think Caroline Casey and the Valuable 500 movement is extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's a movement that's come of age. There've been a number of different attempts to get disability on the board agenda, and she has a global bee in her bonnet. So she's got the attention of Davos. She's got the attention of business leaders. And she's on a mission to get 500 companies to put disability on the board agenda. And while, of course, she is, unashamedly working with private sector organisations, nonetheless, that has a positive and knock-on effect with chief execs within the public sector.
Yeah, it will do. Yeah, it's that whole thing of looking around, what's going on. Oh, we better do that. So, yes, it could just create that healthy competition, I think.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that has been a barrier, but that is changing. I think the other barrier is, and we've already spoken about, I think the barrier that is a real challenge is how we as individuals come to the human experience of accepting and making sense, as I say, of a human experience that we prefer not to have. I'm not a huge fan of saying that it's more difficult for one sector strand over and above another. That's not where I've lived in my career. I don't believe that. It's one of my values. I don't believe it is possible to suggest that life is more difficult or problematic for one group of people over and another. I just don't believe that. However, there are some what I would call common truths within and amongst people of different aspects of human difference and different protected characteristics. And one of the themes, I suppose, one of the golden truths that comes from people who experience disability or mental ill health is that we would prefer not to have had that experience. We can be very politicized. I often say on a platform, if you snap me like a stick of rock, running through the middle is this term social model of disability. But I'm still a woman in her 50s who acquired her impairment in her teens, that that has had some experiences that have been much more problematic, and that comes with sadness in my life and disappointment. It certainly comes with huge pain in terms of my own impairment, and I share this just as illustrative, Layla.
Yeah, of course.
So I think one of the greatest barriers that we have found, and that is why disability has often seemingly felt last on the list, is that the individuals that are part of that movement are grappling with often a change of identity within their story. Not always, of course, a lot of people will have acquired their disability pre-birth or at birth or very shortly after birth or in their teens. But as we know, the statistic is, I think, 84% of all people with a disability or mental ill health are individuals who acquire that experience through the course of their working life. And what that means is that we are dealing with a human condition that we have not invited into our life, that we prefer not to have, and that we have to change large aspects of our life in order to accommodate. And then we have to join others to that, because often our experience can come at a cost or an inconvenience to others. So I think that's the biggest barrier. That is the biggest barrier. Does that make sense, Layla?
It does, yeah. And it just reminded me of something Steph Cutler said on my Disability History Month podcast. She said that everyone will join, most likely like 90% of people will join the disabled club at some point in their time. It's just people aren't ready to receive the membership card. And so that really ties into what you said as well, and around identity, and also how we can try and understand people, but it's often not helpful to say, I know how you feel, but to say, okay, thank you for telling me. What can I do to make things, to enable you to do your job more effectively at work?
Absolutely.
And to move away from that kind of pity. Like, we can feel empathy, but actually people don't want pity, they want to get on with their jobs.
Absolutely, Layla. Yeah, correct.
So yeah, it just reminded me of that. And then thinking about disability, and I actually didn't know that stat, around 83% of people or 84% of people acquire their impairment throughout their life. So the other sometimes misconception that there is around hidden disability and visible disabilities, or visible and invisible disabilities, if you like. And I'm putting that a little bit crudely, because I remember once I was working at a particular organisation, and they said to me, I said, I think we should set up a disabled staff network. They said, it never work, because someone with a hearing impairment has nothing in common with someone with a visual impairment or someone who's a wheelchair user. And I was quite taken aback by that. And they'd worked in the disability sort of field, student support field, for a long time. And I said, okay, and I left it at that. It was about 10 years ago. But again, how, I don't think that now, having run or supported disabled staff networks. But what are your thoughts around getting people to understand that actually people with visible and non-visible visible disabilities have an equal place within advocating for their rights in the workplace or joining a disabled staff network? Yeah,
I agree with you, Layla. And it's one of the reasons why I chose to set up networks, just to address that absolute problem, because again, it goes back to your last question. So one of the greatest barriers we have had is this feeling that there is no common golden thread amongst the experiences of people with different impairments. So as you say, whether you have dyslexia or mental ill health, diabetes, a hearing impairment, so those impairments that can be masked and or not altogether obvious, as opposed to those who may have a more obvious or visible impairment. If you're a wheelchair user, or you have a facial disfigurement, or someone like myself who has profound arthritis and walks and moves differently, I think let me answer it this way. I think the things that join us and creates a common experience is that of the common barriers that we will face, and accessing workplace adjustments, and what the Disability Discrimination Act and now the Equality Act does is make it easier for employers to notice the more routine adjustments that can be made to eliminate those barriers. So, and what that has meant, I think, is it's become more possible, I think, for individuals with different impairments to notice the common barriers that they might have. So whether that is about kit and gizmos, as I would say, whether it's about flexible working, because, if you have mental ill health, for example, or you are waiting for a kidney transplant and you need regular dialysis, being able to plunder and use the flexible or the agile working policy is the thing that really binds us as individuals. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of invisible impairments, it can be a huge barrier. I don't think we should underestimate the challenge that it is to, I suppose, to sometimes have to open up the conversation in ways that you really don't have to do when you have a very visible impairment. There's, I think unanimously, irrespective of impairment, age of onset, typology and severity, not that I'm a fan of that language, but irrespective of what the impairment is, it can be enormously difficult to bring your authentic self to work, and to feel good and confident and sassy with that experience. You add a layer to that, somebody who has a hidden impairment, where you actually have to open up the conversation about this human experience that others may not know about, before you even get to the part of the conversation that says, and by the way, I need an adjustment or a change in the way in which I do my job. And it adds a level of complexity. So it's tough. It's really tough. And I think one of the great things about networks is that they provide a safe space for individuals to talk those issues through with each other. And to understand those barriers, and to swap notes and stories and tips about what to do about that, and develop what I would call some tools and some techniques so that you can own your story, but you can share it in a way that is useful and relevant, but you can also, from time to time, close down conversations or questions that are just not helpful or relevant or useful.
Yeah, that when I think often I've seen disabled staff been forced to divulge incredibly private medical information that absolutely isn't relevant to adjustments or what they need for the workplace. So yes, I think having strategies, and how I've seen disabled staff networks work together, but also groups of individuals work together to help each other to have those difficult, or what feels like a very difficult conversation with your line manager, HR or occupational health.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. In a nutshell. Yep.
And so let's say we've got some organisations listening who say, right, well, we've got a fantastic disabled staff network. It's really thriving. What would be your top tips about keeping a disabled staff network active and thriving? Because of course, like with everything, there'll be ebbs and flows if people leave, if there's change, if people retire. So what are your tips around maintaining an active disabled staff network?
Yeah, I would say three things. One, always keep in your mind's eye, you want a doable strategy. As I say, I went back to my opening gambit there. This is about volunteers who are delivering their passion and their know-how and their commitment and their time. So make sure always that you don't have a strategy that is too cumbersome. So keep it within what I would say the scale of doable. No more than 3 key priorities within a year. That would be my first top tip. I think the second thing is to recognise that a network is what I would call a vehicle for change. It's not a destination.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is it's not a kind of routine, regular, overly constrained function within the business. That's not to say there are some incredibly impressive networks that do have a bit more shape. They might have more resource, they may be more mature, and they may well be better connected with other functions within the business that have quite an impressive list of achievable things to do. But it's about keeping it real. That's what I'm saying, Layla. It's about keeping it real. So have a doable strategy. I think making sure that you have fun. So as I say, 2 is keeping it as a vehicle. It's not a destination. It's not a function. It's a vehicle for developing change. And then, as I say, thirdly, come at things with a new and a fresh eye and be prepared to have some fun. As we know, disability is, as we've said, a human experience that can derail people, sometimes for a period of time, sometimes for a lifetime. And this, it can become quite earnest. And that's not to say that it's not a serious subject. It is deeply important to get this right. But it's not a subject that is devoid of fun and humour. And there's some ironies and, quirky, head-turning stories that we've all had around the experience of disability, and they can be really quite fun. And we know human beings, we change because of different levers, and the more a network can develop a tone and a style that is perceived to be creative, that comes at problems in a different way, and will run up things in a slightly quirky way. So a bit of fun within there. So yeah, those are my 3 tips. Keep your strategy doable. Notice you're not a function, but it's a vehicle to generate change, which liberates you. And then thirdly, run at things with a bit of creativity and fun.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's another thing that can put people off, can't it? Joining staff networks. I think, it's all really serious. I'm going to have to analyse policies, and there is a destination. And I'd never thought of it that way. And actually, that's very helpful for me. Is of course they're not destinations, because ideally you want to get there, but in reality you don't. So it's gathering a stone that gathers moss type thing, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you have fun doing that.
Absolutely. Yep. Got it in one.
And so thank you so much, Kate, for joining us. And, I'm hoping that listeners are going to be like, right, it's Purple Space. How do I join up? Want to know more about Kate Nash. So I'll share your social media links in the show notes. But is there anything now you want to tell people about your Twitter, or how to get in touch and find out more about Purple Space and what you do?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that. We would love any organisation who either has an existing network or is thinking about setting one up to get in touch. And we would love to support the organisations into existence. So 2 ways. You can have a look at our website, and that's www.purplespace.org. So that's www.purplespace.org, or come and join us on Twitter and join the Twitter family. That's @mypurplespace. So either of those, or shoot us an email. If you get into our website, you'll see the email addresses. And we would love to support others who may be interested.
Oh, great. Thank you, Kate. There's so much. I think there's so much from your lived experience. There's so much you shared with us about your professional experience, the organisations you've worked with, and of course, all the wonderful work that you've done with Purple Space. And I really hope people are raring to go. And I can't emphasise how brilliant Purple Space is. When I worked at Imperial College London, we were a member, and we got so much from it, and access to the events and the wonderful things that Purple Space put on. So even if you've got an inkling and you want to find out more, I would say do it. And a huge thank you to Kate, because you're incredibly busy, and I'm so honoured that you came on the podcast today.
Oh, huge pleasure. We love your work, Layla. You're one to watch, an amazing change agent in this world. So, congratulations in terms of what you're doing. Happy New Year to you and your clients and your networks, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, thank you so much, Kate, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.